We spoke about the tarot being a story of a journey, and we've also mentioned many times that these cards with the Thoth deck and in other decks are all rich in duality symbolism, and we can see that yet again here with the transition of the Magus into the Priestess, the next card, the card number 2. And so if we've seen the Magus video, you will know that he is connected with the organisation of the manifestation, so he's putting everything in order for things to be manifest. And now we're transitioning into the Priestess, which goes from that physical world into the spiritual. She's connecting us with our spiritual energy, our soul, our higher consciousness. And because of that, she occupies path 13 in the Tree of Life, which is actually the path which is sometimes known as unifying intelligence, just as we've said, and it links together Kether and Tippereth. But as always, these videos are about looking at the actual symbolisms in the cards themselves, and so let's have a look at the Thoth Priestess, which as you can see is yet again quite different from the Rider-Waite version and other versions, but we will come to these later because they have some interesting elements as well. But let's start actually right down at the bottom of the actual card, and as we've seen before with the Magus, there are symbols here right at the bottom as well. And so you can see here at the bottom left an association with the Hebrew letter Gimel, which means camel, and you can also see a camel in the actual diagram as well. The camel is one of those symbols which has many different meanings, and yet here we should perhaps look at the association with the camel and baptism in the Bible, and the idea of the water here, which connects them all together. And so because a camel carries water through the desert, or at least it's said to, this water represents our consciousness, and the desert represents our journey of meditation or our journey into enlightenment. And so we carry within us our consciousness through the desert. Unless we have that water with us, we would perish in the desert. And so unless we have that consciousness within us through our meditation, we will not make it into the end of the meditation. The second symbol on the bottom of the card is the moon, and the Priestess card, being a divine female card, is very much associated with the moon. The moon is the highest aspect of what we would call the divine feminine, and so this is a wonderful symbol of for the first time in the Thoth cards we actually have a purely feminine symbol, where we had much more androgynous cards beforehand with the Fool and the Magus. The moon is of course highly changeable. It has all kinds of different phases and shapes and faces to it, and so we'll actually come back to the moon later, but the moon here at the bottom is the many different aspects of the divine feminine, the goddess. And we can see this straight away yet again if we now move on to the image of the Priestess herself with the Thoth deck. We can see here the crown of Isis right up on the top of her head. This crown of Isis is various moon phases. It's the waxing moon, the waning moon, and the full moon. And so taken as a whole, this represents life as a whole, such as these triple goddess pictures which I've seen in Wicca and neo-pagan beliefs. This is the flow of life. It's the many different phases and chapters in our own lives, as well as the lives of the universe. There are actually 7 moon crescents which can be seen radiating wonderfully out of the bottom of this crown of Isis, just behind the Priestess here. 7, as we know, is associated with the chakras, and if we make it more of a purely feminine symbol for this particular card, it could be therefore associated with Venus, and would link her with another tarot card, which we will come to in due time, of the Empress, of whom is ruled by Venus. You can also see in the same general area around the eyes of the Priestess, you can see yet again the sign of infinity. This goes back to that path on the Tree of Life that she is part of, the connection with Kether, the pure, formless, white, wonderful spirit the infinite consciousness of which is being radiated here. And so all these symbols in this part of the card are about that flow of consciousness and flow of spirit, and how it would manifest within the world, being those moon phases, being the passages of the years and of birth and death and the various elements in our life. And yet if we zoom out a little, we can see that the priestess is sitting upon a throne being such a symbol of power and of stability. And so we have what appears to be something which is contradictory, and yet it's actually telling us that in order to engage up in the wonderful flows of the universe, all the flow of life, we would sit back on our throne, we would accept these changes, as you can see there flowing behind her. And so she's not trying to control these events like we have in certain cards. However, she is at one with them, she's allowing them to flow, and so allowing this constant change in the universe to happen and being at peace with it is an important symbol here in the card. You can see, if you just look above the throne as well, that she has with her a bow. The bow is willpower, it's the power of the will, and so she's not just sort of sitting back and saying, oh well, never mind, let this stuff happen. It's saying that she has a very strong will here as well. This will is the balance. This is allowing what Crowley in Thelema has the idea of the true will, of course, and so you would follow your will but also have your true will. And so you're not fighting against your true will, you are allowing that to flow. And yet you also have a great willpower, so you're not just blasé and allowing things to happen. The bow, of course, has many other symbols as well. The actual sound of the bow is Om, which is the universal frequency. The universal frequency which we would use in meditation to really change our whole mindset straight away. And often harps and bows and string type instruments within this type of symbology do represent the divine sound of Om. Purely physically speaking, if you look at the actual bow itself, it could be described as a type of lyre. The lyre being in mythology an instrument which is used by Apollo. Apollo being the brother of Artemis, of course, in your classical studies will have told you. So the brother of Artemis, Apollo. If you look at Crowley's book Liber 777, he will therefore in that book attribute Tippereth to Apollo. And so this brings us right back to the beginning, with the priestess using that lyre, which is used by Apollo, meaning that she is linked with her path on the tree of life, where she goes from Tippereth to Kether. Absolutely no stone is left unturned with the symbols in these cards, and that's what makes them so fascinating. If you even look very closely at the very bottom of the throne, you will see an upside down crescent moon shape. Very easy to miss, as some of these symbols are. This upside down or inverted crescent could perhaps symbolise the unconscious mind. So this is the part of the consciousness that we don't see. It's the receptive mind, if you like, in modern terms, the subconscious. That kind of hidden mind which accepts suggestions which are given to it, and it's not a part of the mind that we see or are aware of, and so it's pointing downwards. And the inverted crescent moon can also be found later on in the tarot with a very strange card, which is the card of the moon, which we will come to later. And yet the priestess has a positive relationship with the subconscious. It's on her throne, because she wouldn't have it on her throne if she didn't have a good relationship with it. And of course, as a divine feminine archetype, she has a very strong intuition, and her intuition, and therefore the types of suggestions which are in her subconscious, are very highly powered and very highly developed. And so the subconscious is like a huge resource that we can tap into, yet most people don't. And she's got it right there on her throne. She's sitting upon it. She's mastered it. She has this huge position upon the tree of life with the Tippereth and the Kether. and this links her to the middle pillar, that strong liminal point between all things. And so, staying with that idea for a moment, let's just swap to the popular High Priestess card of the Rider-Waite, just because it's slightly easy to explain it with this card. So you can see on the Rider-Waite card that she sits in front of two pillars. One is black and one is white. These are Jachin and Boaz, which are pillars which are said to be on the outer walls of Solomon's temple. They are used very frequently in Freemasonry, and many Masonic lodges have Jachin and Boaz on the outer walls of their doors. Of course, Jachin and Boaz here represent a passage between worlds, the entering of a veil, and of course the priestess is sat in between a veil. She's sat in the midst of the veil of illusion, the world which is neither form nor formlessness. She therefore is that middle pillar. She is the truth which lies behind all form, which is of course ultimately illusion, and all separateness, which is ultimately illusion. All comes together beyond the veil, all the different realms of consciousness, and so she is sitting in between that veil. Jachin and Boaz in Masonry can also simply represent, in very basic terms, how when we enter into certain places, we behave in a certain way, or the place feels different. So like when we would enter into school, we're in sort of school mode, and then when we go back out, we're back to our normal selves. So it represents, in that respect, the crossing of a boundary, the entering and exiting from somewhere where things are different, rules are different, or it simply feels different. So bringing that back to the Thoth Priestess, of course, with Thelema and Aleister Crowley's symbology here, this idea of her sitting in between the veil and being that conduit for moving beyond the worlds of illusion would mean that here she is the holy guardian angel archetype which we see in Thelema. She takes us from that world of illusion up to our highest state of consciousness, so transcending the veil into Kether, the formless, white, wonderful light of spirit. So if we actually look now, like actually in front of the card, which is supposedly in front of the veil. So we've got the camel, which we had before, and around the camel you can see all manner of different fruits and flowers and natural symbols. On the Tree of Life, Tepereth is said to suggest the idea of beauty and wonder. And so these, all the different fantastic colours and shapes represent that beauty and wonder. And yet the idea here is that the truth is actually concealed within their form, because of course remember that form is ultimately illusion. What we think is solid and stiff and has never moved is actually moving all the time. It's just a jumble of vibrations and frequencies, and so it's all illusion. And if we are going to follow this path that the card is telling us, which is to go through that veil, then we have to see them as illusion, and also therefore see that truth is somehow contained within them. So for instance, the flower on the right hand side has 10 petals. The 10 petals on the Tree of Life are Malkuth, the physical world, the world of manifestation. And you can see that even in the actual shape of it being more 3D, more kind of solid looking, whereas the flower over on the left hand side, the petals in it are concave, suggesting a type of receptiveness for gathering of the spirit. The camel, which is actually in between the two flowers, interestingly enough, like the priestess, is sitting between the pillars on the Tree of Life. You'll also see in this general area a pine cone and some grapes. These associated themselves with Bacchus and of Dionysus. And so as well as many other symbols, they're speaking about wine and wine making and fertility and ritual and agriculture and all that type of thing. And so that represents a wonderful potential that we have, the creative mind, the creative spark, and yet it can also mean the intoxication of the world of illusion. And so you can see that they are positioned in the way that they are in front of the veil. They are the world of illusion that we can become lost in if we are not careful with them. What's quite interesting is that the geometric, solid-looking forms that we mentioned before, and you can see that they are, of course, very simply, they represent the manifested world. They are the universe come into form. They look to me like cymatic patterns almost. They are the building blocks of the earth. They are the Lego bricks of which we have built the shape that was in our minds before we sat down to build it. And so this very wonderful card, a very positive card, especially they say if it appears upright in your readings, can mean that we have in our lives a desire to go beyond that world of illusion, to peer behind that veil, if you like. It can mean that there may be times of darkness, that desert that the camel is crossing, where we're lost and we have no idea where to go, and yet deep within us, that carrying of water in us is that consciousness which can carry us and sustain us throughout our journey. As a divine feminine card, it can also simply represent the feminine side of our consciousness and our intuition. And many people, especially male people, can sometimes be frightened of engaging in that side of themselves, and yet everybody, of course, has masculine and feminine counterparts within them, and all sides of our consciousness should be embraced and loved for what they are. And so it's said sometimes that in a reading, if the card is upside down, that it could mean that the person isn't accepting that side of themselves, for example. And that can be for females having the reading, of course, as well as for males. Having the card upside down as well puts all that stuff at the bottom to the top. That could also mean, of course, that we are simply looking at things on their surface, looking at them just for what they appear to be, without actually truly understanding what they really are and understanding them with depth. Having the card upside down really does change its meaning, therefore it can mean that we're too caught up with that material side and that we don't see the veil, and so we end up standing simply in front of the veil, maybe not even seeing that it's there, or struggling to get behind it because all this stuff is in the way and we can't see that this is actually an illusion. And of course, as it is an illusion, we can walk freely throughout that spectrum and cross the veil and continue upon our journey.